I ironed the black dress Michael always said made me look like I meant business, then realized there was no one left to tease me about it. The house was too clean, too quiet. I'd spent the evening before wiping every counter and arranging every sympathy card so I'd have one thing I could control when everything else was out of my hands. The funeral program sat on the kitchen table next to the car keys, my glasses, and the cherrywood pen we'd bought on our 25th anniversary trip to Door County. Michael loved that pen. "A good pen makes you careful with your words," he used to say. I tucked it into my purse as if his steadiness could travel with me. At 8:07 a.m., I called my son. The first ring was hope. The second ring was habit. By the fourth, I was bracing for voicemail when Daniel finally answered. Music bled through the line, upbeat, thumping, the kind of soundtrack meant for a rooftop, not a morning like this. "Hey, Mom," he said, dragging the word out like he was walking into sunlight with a hangover. "Everything okay?" "We're leaving at 10, honey," I said, keeping my voice even. "Visitation starts at 11. The service is at noon. You still have time to make it." There was a pause, a rustle, then Sophie's voice in the background, high and thrilled, like someone trying to keep balloons from popping. "Ask her if the florist can switch to peonies." "Mom," Daniel said, rushing his words now. "We talked about this. Today's Sophie's birthday. We've got this thing planned. Reservations, deposits, the whole nine. I can't just change it." "You're not changing a dinner reservation, Daniel," I said, staring at the program. Michael James Hart, 1959-2025. "You're choosing between your father's funeral and a party." Another pause. The music dropped lower. "Dad wouldn't want me to mess up Sophie's day. He always said, celebrate life, remember?" I closed my eyes, counted 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. When you teach kindergarten for 29 years, you learn how to breathe through the wildness. "Your father also taught you to show up. He put your name down as a pallbearer." "I didn't agree to that," Daniel said, somewhere between defensive and pleading. "And anyway, it's just, look, Sophie's only 28 once. There are caterers waiting, people flying in." "People are here too," I said. "They're bringing casseroles and hugging me and pretending I'm not breaking in half." He sighed. "Mom, be reasonable. You've got Aunt Carol and the church ladies. I'll come by tomorrow. We'll do something private. Just you and me. That might even be nicer." The line went quiet, except for the clink of glass, the hush of laughter. I pictured him in that apartment Sophie decorated like an influencer's dream. Neon sign saying, "Good vibes only," a bar cart, discarded ribbon on the floor. When Michael was sick, Daniel had meant to come home more. He always meant to. He was busy, he said, the way young people are busy like a badge. "I hear you," I said finally. "Thank you for answering. I love you." "Love you too," he said, relief flooding his voice. "Happy birthday, Soph," he shouted away from the phone, then came back. "I'll call later." I set the phone down gently, as if the table had bones. I picked up the program and crossed out Daniel's name with Michael's cherrywood pen. The ink caught, a tiny stutter where my hand trembled. Then I put on my coat. By 10, the driveway was a parade of casseroles. You could measure grief in green bean dishes in our town. Carol arrived with a box of tissues, 3 spare pairs of pantyhose, and a face so carefully composed I wanted to ruin it just to have company. "You don't have to be brave," she whispered, squeezing my hand. "Not with me." "I'm not brave," I said. "I'm punctual." The church smelled like lemon oil and lilies. The sanctuary looked the way it always did. Hymn numbers slid into their slots. Banners for Lent still hanging because no one had taken them down yet. Pastor Jim met me at the door, his mouth forming the soft shapes of pastoral comfort. He'd baptized Daniel right there. When Daniel screamed so loud the congregation laughed. He'd eaten the deviled eggs at every potluck since '97. He was kind and familiar, and the presence of both almost undid me. People came. They came because the Midwest shows up. They came in practical shoes and dark suits that had seen other funerals. The men from Michael's bowling league, the guy at the hardware store who always gave him the contractor discount, even though Michael joked that fixing the back steps didn't make him a contractor. Former students of mine with babies on their hips, whispering, "Mrs. Hart taught me to read," like I could hold that up against empty space on the pew where Daniel should have been. "Where's your Danny?" Mrs. Nolan asked, adjusting her hearing aid as if she'd misheard my son's absence. "He had a prior commitment," I said. The phrase tasted like pennies. Carol's eyes shuddered for a second, then opened with the brightness of a person who chooses diplomacy as a kind of prayer. During the eulogy, Pastor Jim spoke about faith and fixing what can be fixed. He said Michael had a quiet strength, which was one of those minister phrases that means the person kept showing up when it mattered. It was true. When the water heater burst, he had a shop vac in the basement before I could finish saying, "Oh no." When my father had a stroke, Michael slept in a reclining chair in the hospital for 3 nights and still went to work in the mornings. He took Daniel to every dentist appointment, even when work was short-handed, because Daniel hated the smell of the place. And Michael said, "You don't leave your kid alone with the things he hates." I kept my hands folded and my face calm and my eyes on the cross above the altar, so I wouldn't look left at the pew he should have filled. I thought about how grief comes in waves, and how no one warns you that the first wave is sometimes the phone call where your child makes himself smaller than convenience. At the graveside, the wind lifted the pastor's robe. The funeral director did those practiced movements, the lowering belts, the pause, the nod to the shovel. Carol slid her arm through mine. Someone pressed a lily into my hands, and I set it on the casket, even though Michael always preferred the cheap annuals from the hardware store. Marigolds and petunias he jammed into the front bed the minute the frost threat lifted. He said flowers were like people. The flashy ones were nice for pictures, but the tough, ordinary ones stuck around. "Do you want a minute?" Pastor Jim asked when the others had drifted back to their cars, their murmurs soft as the breeze through the maples. "I've had months of minutes," I said, not unkindly. Then I stepped closer to the granite that would have his name, and I whispered the only sentence that mattered. "I took your pen, love. I'll try to be careful with my words." Back at the fellowship hall, someone had already cut the sheet cake. That's how it goes. You cry, you pray, you eat. Mrs. Jensen, who makes the best ham salad in 3 counties, put a plate in my hands and told me to nibble. People told their Michael stories, how he always kept jumper cables in the trunk and acted like it was nothing when he rescued you in the grocery parking lot. How he taught Sunday school for the middle school boys because no one else would. How he called his mother every Sunday night without fail. A chorus of ordinary goodness. I tucked each story in the place where my heart felt torn and told myself that maybe that's how we keep people. Layer by layer, memory by memory, like quilts. At 3, the room thinned. The church ladies stayed to stack chairs and box leftovers. Carol carried flowers to the car I was going to drive home alone for the first time in a long time. When everyone else had gone, Pastor Jim pressed an envelope into my hand. "From the missions committee," he said. "No rush on anything, just when you're ready." At home, the answering machine blinked once. No message. I set the flowers on the dining table, where the light slants just right in late afternoon and makes everything look kinder. I hung my coat on the hook Michael had put up crooked and never fixed, because every time I asked, he'd say, "It's got personality," and then kiss me to distract me from getting a level. I washed my face and sat on the edge of the bed, in the dress I meant business in. I looked at Michael's nightstand, the paperback he never finished, the reading glasses folded on top. I looked at the clock. At 7 p.m., someone somewhere would sing "Happy Birthday" to Sophie while a sparkler fizzed on top of a cake. I wondered if Daniel would think about his father when the room went dark for that breath before the song. The phone stayed quiet. I picked up Michael's pen and wrote his name on a notepad because the ink needed an assignment, and so did I. Then I turned off the bedroom light and let the house tell me, in its steady settling sighs, that it would hold me tonight. The silence after everyone left was worse than the service itself. At least in the church there had been the shuffle of shoes, the clatter of coffee cups, the murmured condolences from people who meant well but didn't know what else to say. At home, it was just the hum of the refrigerator and the old wall clock in the kitchen, marking seconds that dragged like years. I slipped out of the black dress and folded it across the chair, though a voice in my head whispered, I'd never need it folded so neatly again. It was going to hang in the closet like a monument. I changed into Michael's old flannel shirt, the one that still smelled faintly of sawdust and aftershave. It was too big for me, the sleeves swallowing my hands, but it anchored me in a way nothing else did. I sat on the bed, staring at the nightstand. His reading glasses were still there, folded neatly on top of the paperback he never finished. The bookmark was halfway through, just 20 pages from the end. That was Michael, always taking his time, savoring things. He would have read those last 20 pages the next morning with coffee, and then he would have told me how the story wrapped up. Now, I'd never know what he thought of it. I opened the drawer, looking for nothing in particular, and found the leather-bound notebook Michael had kept for years. I used to tease him that he was a relic for preferring pen and paper to phone notes. Inside, his handwriting filled page after page. Budgets, reminders, sometimes little prayers. On one page, in block letters, he'd written, "Don't let Danny forget where he came from." The tears came hot and sudden, blurring the words until they ran together like ink in rain. I pressed my hand flat against the paper, as if I could push the meaning deeper into me, as if holding his words could give me strength. There were lists, too. Every expense for Daniel's schooling, tallied and organized. Tuition checks, textbook costs, rent for his first apartment. Michael had noted every sacrifice in the margins. Skipped anniversary trip this year, Danny's car broke down. Worked overtime at the mill. Danny needed deposit for grad school. Canceled vacation. Medical bill gave money to Danny. It wasn't bitterness, it was record-keeping. Michael always said a man should know where his money went, and for him, it always went to Daniel. I traced the figures with my finger. Tens of thousands, then hundreds. Years of sweat and overtime and quiet sacrifices. I remembered those nights Michael came home late, boots still damp from the factory floor, and told me not to wait up for dinner. I remembered holding Daniel when he cried as a toddler because Michael was gone again. And Michael had said, "I'm doing this for him, Linda. Someday he'll understand." Had he? I walked to the closet and found the box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were Daniel's report cards, photos, little awards with gold stars on them. Michael had kept everything. On the back of each paper, he'd written notes in his neat print. "So proud. Our boy is brilliant. Worth every hour." I sat on the floor, papers spread around me, and realized the weight wasn't just grief, it was betrayal. Daniel hadn't just missed the funeral. He had dismissed everything his father had built for him, everything we'd given. The boy who used to climb onto Michael's shoulders at the county fair was now a man who couldn't set aside one evening of celebration for grief. I looked at the box, until the edges blurred, until I felt like I was floating outside myself. Then I noticed an envelope tucked between old photographs. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was Michael's handwriting, addressed to me. "Linda," it began, "if you find this after I'm gone, promise me one thing. Don't let Daniel forget who loved him first. We gave him everything we had. I just hope it was enough." The words gutted me. They were love and resignation tangled together. Michael had worried even then that our sacrifices wouldn't mean anything to Daniel. I folded the letter carefully, pressing the crease flat. My chest ached with the kind of pain that isn't sharp but steady, like a wound that decides it wants to live inside you. The phone rang. For half a second, I thought, maybe, just maybe, it was Daniel calling to apologize, to say he couldn't sleep, that he'd made a terrible mistake. But it was only Carol checking if I'd eaten something. "I'm fine," I lied, staring at the papers scattered on the floor. When I hung up, I gathered them into stacks. Tuition, rent, loans, gifts. All the tangible proof of love that had been poured into one son who had spent his father's final day raising a glass to someone else. I pushed the box back into the closet, but the ache stayed with me. I turned off the light and lay in bed with Michael's flannel pulled tight, whispering to the empty room. "He should have been here. You deserved better." And in that stillness, grief hardened into something sharper. Not anger exactly, but resolve. The sense that something had shifted forever. The morning after the funeral, the house felt different. Not just empty, but hollowed out, as if even the walls knew Michael wasn't here anymore. I brewed coffee the way he liked. 2 scoops, water filled exactly to the line, and then realized I was the only one who would drink it. I poured it into his favorite mug, the one with the faded Cubs logo, and held it like a relic. That's when the phone buzzed on the counter. Daniel. For a second, my heart leapt. Maybe he had finally come to his senses. Maybe he'd call to apologize, to ask how I was holding up, to say the words he should have said days ago. I pressed answer, holding my breath. "Hey, Mom!" His voice was bright, almost cheerful, like the tone he used when he wanted something. "How are you doing?" I gripped the mug tighter. "I'm managing," I said carefully. Good. Listen." He trailed off, and in the background I heard Sophie's voice, chirping about receipts. My stomach sank. "Daniel?" I asked, but I already knew. "Yeah, so, the party last night was amazing. Sophie had the best time. But we kinda went a little overboard. You know how it is? Steakhouse, live band, decorations, champagne. It added up." He gave a small laugh, like we were co-conspirators in some harmless indulgence. "The credit card bill came in and it's rough. About 15 grand. Could you spot us? Just until we get things sorted?" The mug burned hot against my palm. I set it down before I dropped it. $15,000. I repeated slowly, as if saying it out loud would make the absurdity clearer to him. "Yeah, I know it's a lot, but it's just temporary. Sophie's a little stressed, you know how she gets. I figured it'd be easier if you helped us out. You're good with this stuff." My throat tightened. I stared at the wedding photo on the mantel, Michael in his rented tux, me with flowers from the backyard, both of us grinning like we'd just discovered a secret world. He had worked double shifts for years so Daniel could go to college without debt. And here was our son, calling the morning after his father's funeral, asking me to pay off champagne and sparklers. "Daniel," I said, my voice lower now, steadier. "Your father was buried yesterday." A pause. "I know, Mom. I'm sorry I couldn't be there, but—" "No, listen to me." I pressed my hand flat on the counter, grounding myself. "I have never told you no. Not once. For cars, for tuition, for rent, for that down payment you couldn't cover. We've given you everything we had. But this, I drew in a shaky breath. This is the first time I'm saying no. On the other end of the line, silence stretched. Then his voice shifted, sharper. What do you mean, no? Is something wrong with the bank account? You can afford it, Mom. Don't make this a big deal. I'm not making it a big deal, I said. You are. He scoffed. Mom, come on. Dad would have wanted you to help me. He always said family sticks together. The words sliced me. He was using Michael like a weapon, twisting his father's kindness into a lever. Your father wanted you to stand beside him at his funeral, I said, each word measured. You chose not to. Don't talk to me about what he would have wanted. For a moment, all I could hear was his breathing, jagged and uneven. Then came Sophie's voice in the background again, urgent. Tell her we already spent it. We need it. Daniel's mask slipped. If you won't help us, fine. But don't expect us to come around much. Sophie's furious. She thinks you don't care about us. I closed my eyes. My hand trembled, but my voice didn't. If not giving you money means you stay away, then maybe that's what I need. You can't be serious, he snapped. Mom, we're your family. I stared at Michael's empty chair across the table. Then start acting like it. I ended the call before he could answer. The click of the phone landing on the counter was louder than I expected, like a door slamming shut. For a long time, I stood in the kitchen, staring at the mug, the photo, the empty space that used to be filled by a man who would never have allowed this conversation to happen. I thought about all the times I had bent over backward to make sure Daniel never felt the sting of want. How I told myself it was love, when maybe it was weakness. Now, with the house echoing around me, I realized something with painful clarity. Saying no wasn't just about money. It was about finally drawing a line in the sand, one I should have drawn years ago. I poured the coffee down the sink. The Cubs mug clattered against the porcelain, the sound ringing like an exclamation point at the end of a sentence. For the first time in decades, I had told my son no. And for the first time, I felt the faintest flicker of control returning to my life. The following Monday, I woke before dawn out of habit. For 22 years, Michael and I had run the bakery together. He handled the ovens, I handled the counter, and somehow we kept the place afloat through recessions and competition from big-box grocery stores. People don't come here for cheap, Michael used to say. They come here for care. Now, it was just me. The glow from the front sign, Hart's Bakery. Since 2003 felt heavier without him. I unlocked the door, inhaling the smell of flour and yeast that clung to the walls, and thought about how many mornings we'd stood here, side by side, rolling dough while the world was still asleep. By 7, the regulars trickled in, Mr. Thompson with his paper and black coffee, the Johnson twins grabbing cinnamon rolls before school. Everyone offered quiet condolences, and I nodded, handing over change with a smile that felt rehearsed. But inside, I was bracing myself, because Daniel was supposed to show up. He'd been on the payroll since college, manager, though everyone knew that meant showing up late, ducking out early, and taking credit when things went right. Michael always said, "Give him time, he'll grow into it." I wanted to believe that, so I swallowed my frustration and covered his slack. But now, after the funeral, after that phone call, I couldn't ignore it anymore. At 8:30, the bell above the door jingled. Daniel strolled in wearing sunglasses, holding a latte from the fancy cafe across town. The sight alone was enough to twist something inside me. "Morning, Mom," he said, kissing the air near my cheek as if he were doing me a favor. "You're late," I said simply. He shrugged. Traffic. I watched him toss his jacket onto a chair where a customer had just sat moments before. He moved behind the counter, scrolling through his phone, not noticing that Mrs. Evans was waiting to pay. I slid the bag of pastries across the counter myself, smiling at her apology glance, then turned to Daniel. We need to talk, I said. Sure, he said, eyes still on the glowing screen. But first, can you cover the register? Sophie's coming by later with some invoices she wants me to look at. That did it. Something hardened in me, a steel I didn't know I had. Daniel, put your phone down. He blinked, surprised by the sharpness in my voice. Slowly, he lowered it. What's going on? I can't do this anymore, I said. Not the bakery, not the way things have been. You've treated this place like a safety net, not a job. And after what happened last week, after how you treated your father's funeral, I can't let it go on. His mouth dropped open. Are you firing me? Yes, I said. The word landed heavy, final. I'm letting you go. He laughed, but it was the brittle kind, the laugh of someone who doesn't believe the ground can actually shift beneath them. Mom, you can't fire me. This is family business. This is my business, I corrected. Your father and I built it. We carried flour sacks up those stairs until our backs ached. We mixed batter at 2 a.m. because the orders had to be ready. We paid bills late so you could have textbooks on time. We did everything so you could walk in here with a title and a paycheck. But it's not yours to waste. His face flushed red. You're overreacting. Sophie said you might be emotional. You just buried Dad. I slammed my hand against the counter hard enough that flour puffed into the air. Customers turned. Daniel froze. Don't you dare use your father as an excuse, I said, my voice steady, low. He deserved your respect. You didn't give it to him, and you don't respect this place either. That ends today. His jaw tightened. So what? You just cut me off? After everything you and Dad gave me? You're seriously going to throw me out? Yes, I said again, because it was the only word that mattered. You're 34 years old, Daniel. You need to stand on your own 2 feet. Consider this your last day here. He stared at me, stunned, then finally spat. Fine. Don't expect me to come running when you need help. I've been running this bakery for 22 years, I said quietly. I'll manage. The bell above the door jingled again as a customer walked in, and Daniel stormed past them, sunglasses back on like armor. He didn't look back. I turned to the counter, dusted flour off my apron, and smiled at the waiting customer. What can I get for you today? My hands shook as I packed a box of muffins, but underneath the trembling was something new, resolve. The bakery was mine again, and so was my life. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting on Daniel. The bakery closed at 6, but I stayed until almost 8, wiping down counters that were already clean. The hum of the refrigerators filled the silence. When I finally locked up, the street outside was dark, except for the neon sign of the diner across the way. Couples lingered over pie and coffee. I envied their ordinariness. At home, I pulled Michael's notebook from the nightstand again. His words, "Don't let Danny forget where he came from," echoed through me like a bell. For 34 years, I had tried to live by that, but Daniel had forgotten anyway. Or maybe he'd never cared. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake thinking about the future, my future without Michael, without the man who steadied every wobble in our life. What was I supposed to do now? Keep pouring money into Daniel's bottomless pit? Watch him waste what we had built? The thought made my stomach churn. By morning, the decision was clear. If I wanted to honor Michael, I had to change course. I called Robert Lane, our family attorney. Robert had drawn up our will 15 years ago, back when Michael was healthy and Daniel was still in college. Back then, we had divided everything neatly. If one of us died, the other got the house, the bakery, the savings. When we were both gone, Daniel would inherit it all. But Michael wasn't here anymore, and I couldn't leave everything in Daniel's hands. Robert welcomed me into his office that afternoon. His secretary handed me a cup of tea, her eyes flicking with quiet sympathy. She knew why I was there. Robert, with his kind eyes and shelves lined with law books, gestured for me to sit. "Linda," he said gently, "I was so sorry to hear about Michael. He was a good man." "Thank you," I said, folding my hands in my lap. They wouldn't stop trembling. "What can I do for you today?" I drew in a breath, steadying myself. "I want to rewrite my will, and I want Daniel out of it." Robert's eyebrows rose. "That's a big step. Can you tell me what's driving this decision?" So I told him. I told him about the funeral, about the phone call asking for $15,000 the day after burying his father. I told him about the bakery, how Daniel strolled in late with a latte and no shame, how I had to fire him in front of customers. My voice cracked only once. When I said the words, he chose Sophie's birthday over his father's funeral. Robert leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight. "I understand," he said. "I don't want Daniel inheriting everything Michael and I worked for," I continued. "He'll waste it. He's already wasted more than I can count. I want to do something better with it, something Michael would be proud of." "What do you have in mind?" Robert asked. I opened my purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was an idea I'd been scribbling at the kitchen table since 3 a.m. "The Michael Hart Foundation," I said softly. "Scholarships for kids who can't afford college, funding for cancer research, support for families going through what we went through." Robert's face softened. "That's a beautiful tribute, Linda." "It's more than tribute," I said. "It's justice. Michael worked himself to the bone so Daniel could have every opportunity, and Daniel threw it away. I won't let his selfishness define our legacy." Robert nodded slowly. "We can structure the foundation as a trust. Your assets, the bakery, the house, your savings, can be transferred upon your passing. We'll name trustees, set up bylaws. It will protect the funds from any claims Daniel might try to make." "Good," I said firmly. "And I want it stated clearly in the will. Daniel is to receive nothing, not 1 cent. Robert hesitated. "Linda, you should know, excluding a child can be messy. He might contest it." "Then let him try," I said. "I want the language airtight. He's had enough of us already." The rest of the meeting was business. We went over accounts, property deeds, insurance policies. Each decision felt like carving stone, final, solid. When Robert asked about personal items, I thought carefully. "The house should be sold," I said. "The proceeds go to the foundation. Michael's tools, donated to the trade school. My jewelry, auctioned for charity." I paused, swallowing. "Except my wedding ring, I want to be buried with it." Robert nodded, making notes. "And Daniel's childhood belongings?" "Donate them," I said after a moment. "Maybe some other child can use them. I don't want them gathering dust as reminders." When the papers were ready, 2 witnesses from the office came in. My signature looked shaky on the first page, but by the last, my hand was steady. The new will was done. Daniel was out. The Michael Hart Foundation was in. As I left Robert's office, the sun was setting, casting long golden lines across the street. For the first time since the funeral, I felt lighter. Not happy, happiness was too far away, but purposeful. Michael always believed that grief could be turned into something useful, that pain could plant seeds if you let it. I slid into the driver's seat of my car and looked at the folder of signed documents. My chest loosened. The bakery, the house, the savings. It would all mean something now. My phone buzzed. 3 missed calls from Daniel. I didn't listen to the voicemails. I slipped the phone back into my purse and started the car. The road ahead was dark, but I finally felt like I knew where I was going. The thing about small towns is that nothing stays quiet for long. Davenport wasn't the kind of place where secrets could breathe. People noticed who showed up, who didn't, who brought a casserole, and who didn't bother. And they sure noticed that my son hadn't come to his father's funeral. At first, it was whispers. At the grocery store, Mrs. Jensen leaned over her cart to Carol and said in a voice that carried down the aisle, "Did you see Daniel?" "No, you didn't, because he wasn't there." By Sunday, Pastor Jim mentioned in his sermon the importance of honoring family. He didn't name names, but the congregation knew. They always know. Sophie was the first to feel it. She walked into her yoga class on Wednesday, Matt tucked under her arm, only to be met with polite smiles that didn't reach anyone's eyes. By the second sun salutation, the instructor paused beside her and whispered, "We'd prefer if you left today. Some members are uncomfortable." Sophie stormed out, heels clicking against the hardwood floors, her cheeks red with humiliation. Daniel laughed it off when she told him. "They're just jealous," he said. "People have always envied us." But the laughter sounded forced. The next day, he tried to book his usual lunch table at Romano's, the Italian restaurant where he and Sophie flaunted their lifestyle with bottles of wine they couldn't afford. The hostess, usually bubbly, offered a thin smile. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hart. That table's been reserved indefinitely." When he pressed, she lowered her voice. "It's best if you and your wife find somewhere else." By Friday, the message was clear. Davenport had turned its back. The final blow came at the country club. Daniel had been playing golf there since college, riding Michael's membership. He arrived with his clubs slung over his shoulder, only to find his usual foursome already heading to the course without him. "Sorry, Dan," one of them muttered. "We're full up today." They didn't meet his eyes. By the 9th hole, he realized no one would play with him anymore. Meanwhile, Sophie's social circle crumbled. The ladies' boutique, where she bought overpriced handbags, suddenly lost her credit application. Her salon canceled her standing appointment with a vague excuse about scheduling changes. Even at the grocery store, people turned their carts down different aisles to avoid her. By the second week, Sophie's frustration boiled over. "This is your fault!" she snapped at Daniel in the parking lot of the closed-down boutique. "If you'd just gone to the funeral, none of this would be happening." Daniel's face flushed. "Don't put this all on me. You said we couldn't cancel your birthday party. You said people would notice if I wasn't there." Sophie folded her arms. "And you listened. You always listen to me when it's convenient and blame me when it's not." The fight drew stares from passers-by. Sophie stormed off to the car, muttering about how her life was being ruined by small-town gossip. But it wasn't just gossip. It was judgment. Davenport valued family, loyalty, decency. And Daniel had broken the unspoken rule. You don't abandon your parents, not at the end. Even the professional world started to notice. Daniel went to a Chamber of Commerce luncheon to network for a new job. Normally, he thrived in those settings, charming people with rehearsed jokes. But this time, conversations ended abruptly when he walked up. People excused themselves to take phone calls that didn't exist. His business cards sat untouched at the edge of the table. At home, Sophie scrolled angrily through her phone. "They're freezing us out!" she hissed. "You need to fix this. Call your mother. Make her tell people you were sick or something." I heard about all of it. Not from Daniel, of course. but from friends, neighbors, customers at the bakery who couldn't resist updating me. Mrs. Nolan leaned across the counter one morning and whispered, "Sophie left yoga crying yesterday. Didn't know where to put her face." Carol called to say, "People are talking, Linda. They're finally seeing through him." I didn't spread the stories. I didn't need to. Davenport had its own justice system, carried out in quiet disinvitations and cold shoulders. One Saturday morning, Daniel tried to salvage his pride. He dressed in his best golf shirt and showed up at the club again, hoping time had softened things. Instead, the pro shop manager pulled him aside. "Dan, maybe you'd be more comfortable elsewhere." That was it. No explanations, no second chances. Just a door closing in his face. He drove home in silence, his golf clubs rattling in the trunk. Sophie unleashed her anger the moment they walked through the door. "Do you see what's happening to us? We're being humiliated. I didn't marry into this family to be treated like trash. Fix it, Daniel, or I will." But Daniel didn't know how to fix it. He tried calling me, once, twice, 3 times. I let the calls go to voicemail. He left messages full of excuses. "Mom, people are exaggerating." "Mom, you know I care." "Mom, this is ruining my life. Please say something." I didn't return them, because here was the truth. Davenport's judgment wasn't cruel. It was fair. Michael had been respected because he lived by his values. Hard work, loyalty, family first. Daniel had betrayed those values, and now, the town he thought adored him, saw him for what he was. One evening, I stood in the bakery watching the sunset light slant across the display case. Carol stopped by with fresh flowers and said quietly, "Linda, I know this is hard, but maybe this is what Michael meant when he said not to let Danny forget where he came from." I nodded, placing the flowers in a vase. Maybe she was right. Maybe this exile was the only way Daniel would ever learn. Still, when I lay in bed that night, the silence pressed heavier. Justice, I realized, doesn't erase grief. It just replaces it with something steadier. And as I turned off the light, I whispered to the empty side of the bed, "They see him now, Michael. They finally see." By late spring, the whispers had turned into something Daniel couldn't ignore. Numbers. Cold, hard numbers. The first call came from the bank. "Mr. Hart, your mortgage is 60 days past due. $18,400 outstanding." The voice was polite, but firm, the way a banker learns to be when they've had this conversation too many times. Daniel tried to laugh it off when Sophie asked, but she had already opened the letter. "They're threatening foreclosure," she snapped, shaking the paper at him. "Foreclosure, Daniel! Do you even understand what that means?" He mumbled something about getting help from me, but Sophie cut him off with a glare sharp enough to slice glass. "She won't bail you out again. Everyone knows she's done with us." She was right. I'd called Robert, my attorney, weeks earlier, and signed documents withdrawing as guarantor for Daniel's loans. Michael and I had carried him long enough. The weight wasn't ours to bear anymore. That week, the repo truck came for the BMW. Daniel had bought it on impulse 2 years earlier, parading it through town like a crown jewel. He'd insisted he could afford the payments, and when he couldn't, I had covered them. Not anymore. I watched from across the street in my car as the repo man winched it up. Neighbors peeked from their curtains, whispering. Sophie screamed at the driver, threatening lawsuits that would never come. Daniel stood frozen on the porch, his golf shirt wrinkled, his pride dismantling in front of everyone. Inside their house, the lights flickered one night and then went out for good. Sophie lit candles, her designer heels tapping against the hardwood as she paced. "We can't even pay the electric bill? $1,200? How pathetic is this?" Daniel tried to calm her, but she was beyond calming. "You've ruined me," she hissed. "I married into a family with money, with a name, and now I'm living like. She gestured around the dark room, unable to finish the sentence. "Like people who work for a living?" Daniel shot back, but the bitterness in his tone only deepened the crack between them. They tried to sell their luxury furniture online. The mahogany dining table Michael had once insisted was too extravagant went for $50 to a young couple, who loaded it into a pickup truck with peeling paint. Sophie's designer handbags fetched a fraction of what she'd paid. Even the golf clubs went, handed over to a teenager who counted out crumpled bills while Daniel looked away. The humiliation was complete when Sophie's platinum credit card was declined at Nordstrom, for mascara of all things. She argued at the counter, her voice rising, until the manager quietly told her, "Your co-signer has withdrawn guarantee. The account is suspended." Shoppers turned to stare. Sophie fled the store, humiliated, mascara already streaking down her face. At home, Daniel filled out desperate credit applications. Denied. 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 His debt-to-income ratio was impossible now without a job. He called former business contacts. Voicemail. He showed up at a Chamber of Commerce mixer. Conversations ended when he walked over. He was toxic, and he knew it. Meanwhile, Sophie's patience evaporated. She began to threaten. "If you don't fix this, Daniel, I'll leave. I'm serious. I didn't sign up for bankruptcy and candlelight dinners." One night, I drove past their house. From the street, I could see shadows moving through candlelit rooms, hear raised voices muffled by glass. The lawn had grown patchy. The flower beds Michael once admired were bare. I slowed the car, then kept going. This wasn't cruelty. This was consequence. By midsummer, the foreclosure notice came, taped bright red to their front door. The county auction date was set. When the neighbors saw the moving truck arrive, they didn't offer to help. They watched. Some shook their heads. Others whispered. Sophie hurled clothes into suitcases, her face twisted with rage. Daniel carefully wrapped Michael's old crystal vase, the one gift his father had ever splurged on. It was the only thing he seemed to treat with reverence. As they loaded the last box, Sophie exploded. "I can't do this anymore. I won't live like this. I talked to Eric. Yes, Eric. He's still single. He has money. Real money. Maybe I made a mistake." Daniel stared at her, stunned, but she wasn't finished. "Your mother was right. You're weak. You'll never be enough." She slammed the car door and drove away, leaving him standing in the driveway surrounded by the remnants of a life that wasn't his anymore. That night, Daniel slept alone on the floor of the empty living room. The walls echoed with memories, Sophie's laughter, dinner parties, his own boasts about the life he thought he'd built. Now there was nothing but silence and the faint creak of a house he no longer owned. I heard all this from Carol, from customers at the bakery, from the kind of small-town grapevine that strings together every downfall. And though part of me wanted to rush in, to offer shelter, to soften the blow, I held back. Because this wasn't punishment, it was the truth finally catching up. Michael's words haunted me. Don't let Danny forget where he came from. Now, with everything stripped away, maybe he would finally remember. After Sophie's car taillights disappeared down the street, Daniel stood there in the dark like a man who had been hollowed out. The moving truck was gone. The neighbors' blinds snapped shut, and the silence pressed in on him from all sides. He went inside to the empty house. Well, not quite empty. The bank would take it soon, but for now, there were echoes of what had been. Faint outlines on the walls where picture frames had hung, dents in the carpet where furniture had rested. He lay down on the bare floor, staring up at the ceiling. It creaked in the night, like the house itself was sighing at him. The next morning, he woke with a stiff back and a pounding head. His phone buzzed. It was Sophie. One last message. I'm with Eric. Don't call me. He stared at the words for a long time before tossing the phone across the room. It skittered across the hardwood and hit the wall with a dull thud. For the first time in his life, Daniel felt truly alone. He tried calling friends, old college buddies, co-workers he'd once bragged to, even cousins he hadn't spoken with in years. Most didn't answer. The ones who did kept their voices polite, but cold. Sorry, Dan. Things are busy right now. Maybe another time. They all knew. The story of the funeral had spread, and with it, the judgment. At night, he sat on the porch with a bottle of cheap beer, staring at the street where kids rode their bikes past without looking at him. Once, he had been the guy with the shiny BMW, the man who hosted loud parties and toasted to his success. Now, he was a cautionary tale whispered about at barbecues. Loneliness seeped into everything. He missed the background noise of Sophie's voice, the clatter of dishes from parties, even the way she nagged him about little things. He didn't miss her exactly. He missed what she represented. Status, comfort, belonging. One evening, rummaging through the last box he hadn't opened, Daniel found something that stopped him cold. It was his father's crystal vase, wrapped carefully in newspaper. Michael had bought it decades ago, a rare indulgence, and given it to me one Christmas with a sheepish grin. Daniel sat on the floor, holding it in his hands, remembering how proud his father had been of simple, lasting things. For the first time, genuine tears stung his eyes. He wiped them away quickly, ashamed of crying with no one around to see. But even that moment of clarity didn't last. By the next week, eviction papers were nailed to the door. The bank auction date loomed closer. He moved into a cramped studio above a laundromat, carrying only what he could fit in the back seat of a beat-up Toyota he'd bought off Craigslist. At night, the hum of washing machines shook the thin walls, and the smell of detergent clung to his clothes. He thought about calling me again. Really calling, not to ask for money, but to just talk. To say he was sorry. To admit he was scared. But the words stuck in his throat, and pride kept his thumb from pressing dial. Sophie's betrayal hurt, but the real wound was deeper. He finally had to face himself without distractions, without applause, without someone else to blame. The silence forced him to see what he'd become. And yet, even in his despair, one thing remained the same. He still believed I might rescue him. That somewhere beneath the grief and the anger, I was still his safety net. What he didn't understand was that Michael's death had changed everything. And I wasn't going back. The first knock came on a cold November evening, just as I'd finished washing the dinner dishes. I nearly ignored it. These days, most people called first. But when I peeked through the window, my breath caught. Daniel stood on the porch, shoulders slumped, his hands jammed into the pockets of a wrinkled jacket. For a long minute, I debated not answering, but then I opened the door. He looked older. Not older in the natural way, but worn. His hair had grown unkempt. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and he'd lost weight. He looked like life had carved pieces off him, and in a way, I supposed it had. "Mom," he said, voice thin. Can I come in?" I didn't move. I leaned against the doorframe, folding my arms. "Say what you came to say." He swallowed hard, eyes darting around like a boy caught misbehaving. "I know I messed up. More than messed up. I was wrong not to come to Dad's funeral. I was selfish. I thought I was putting Sophie first, but she's gone now. And I don't have anyone left. Just you." His words hung in the air, and for a second, I wanted to believe them. But then I remembered the phone call after the funeral, his tone when he demanded $15,000, as if grief could wait while bills needed paying. "Daniel," I said carefully, "what was your father's birthday?" He blinked. "June 15th? No," I said, shaking my head. "It was May 19th. And what were his favorite flowers?" He hesitated. "Roses?" "Daisies," I whispered. "He loved daisies." Daniel's face reddened. "Mom, this is ridiculous. I'm here trying to apologize, and you're quizzing me like it's a game show." "It's not a game," I said firmly. "If you really cared, if you really loved your father, you would have known, or at least remembered." He stepped forward, desperate now. "I do care. I know I screwed everything up, but I can change. I'll be the son you always wanted me to be. Just give me another chance." I studied him, searching for something real in his eyes. But beneath the guilt was the same flicker of entitlement I'd seen for years. The belief that if he said the right words, he could smooth everything over. "What do you want, Daniel?" I asked, cutting through the pretense. His shoulders sagged. "I need help. The eviction notices are piling up. I'm working part-time at a gas station, but it's not enough. I can't keep up. Please, Mom, just a little to get back on my feet." There it was, the real reason. The plea wasn't for forgiveness, it was for money. I stepped back, pointing toward the nightstand in the living room. "Do you want to know what your mother really thought of you?" I asked quietly. His brow furrowed. "What?" I picked up Michael's old leather notebook and opened to a page I'd nearly memorized. I read aloud. "I'm worried Daniel only loves our money. What if we've raised a child who can't love?" Daniel's face drained of color. "You're lying. Dad wouldn't have written that." "It's his handwriting," I said, holding up the page. "I found it after he died. He knew. I knew. Deep down, you know too." His eyes glistened, but the softness lasted only a heartbeat. Then his jaw hardened, his voice rising. "So, that's it? You're just going to abandon me? Your only son?" "I gave you everything," I said, my own voice trembling now, but steady with conviction. "Your father and I gave up vacations, dinners, doctor's visits, just so you could have more. And what did you give us back? Absence, excuses, empty promises." He clenched his fists. "This isn't fair. I'm your family. You're supposed to help me. Dad would have wanted you to." I looked him straight in the eye. "Your father wanted you to show up. You didn't." For a moment, he was silent. Then the mask slipped entirely, and his voice turned sharp, venomous. "Fine, be that way. But when you're old and alone in this house, don't come crying to me. I hope you die here by yourself." The words hit hard, but instead of breaking me, they solidified everything I had decided. I stepped back inside and closed the door, the lock clicking softly behind me. For several minutes, he pounded on the door, shouting, begging, threatening. I didn't answer. I walked into the kitchen, put the kettle on, and waited until the pounding stopped. Eventually, his footsteps retreated down the driveway. His car engine sputtered to life, and then silence returned. I carried my tea to Michael's chair by the window and sat down, wrapping my hands around the mug. My chest hurt, but not from doubt, from release. I had finally drawn the line. Outside, the night was still. Inside, for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of peace. Spring arrived the following year with a gentleness I hadn't felt in a long time. After a winter of icy sidewalks and long evenings spent in solitude, the first warm breeze carried with it the smell of earth waking up again. Daffodils lined the churchyard, and I caught myself smiling at them on my way to Sunday service. The Michael Hart Foundation had grown beyond what I ever imagined. What started as a conversation in Robert Lane's office had turned into something real, something tangible. We'd already awarded 20 scholarships to students who might never have afforded college. Letters poured in, handwritten, clumsy, heartfelt, from kids who wanted to be nurses, teachers, mechanics. "Thank you for believing in me," one girl had written in looping script. "I promise I'll make you proud." We also sent $200,000 to a cancer research center in Chicago. They wrote back saying our donation would fund an entire study on early detection, something Michael would have been thrilled about. He always said money should move, not sit. Now it was moving into lives that needed it most. I spent my mornings at the bakery and my afternoons volunteering at the new community center, where we offered tutoring and hot meals. People began to see me less as the grieving widow and more as the woman carrying Michael's torch. For the first time since his death, I felt like I wasn't just surviving, I was building again. Daniel, meanwhile, lived another kind of life. I didn't ask, but in a town like Davenport, news travels faster than the river in flood season. People told me he'd been working at Sam's gas station off Route 6, wearing a stained uniform and pumping gas for folks he used to dine beside at Romano's. Customers came into the bakery whispering, "I saw him there. Looked like he'd aged 10 years. One morning, I walked into the Morning Glory diner for breakfast. I hadn't planned it, but there he was, behind the counter, wiping tables. He froze when he saw me, the rag limp in his hand. "Mom," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Daniel." I nodded, sliding onto a stool. "Coffee, please." His hands shook as he poured. "How are you?" "I'm well," I answered truthfully, and I was. "I'm sorry," he blurted out, setting the cup down too hard. "I know sorry isn't enough, but I get it now. Everything. It wasn't about the money. You and Dad, you just wanted me to love you, didn't you? Not your wallet." I studied his face. For the first time, I saw no arrogance, no expectation. Just weariness, and maybe, just maybe, remorse. "You wanted us to be proud of you," I said softly. He nodded, tears gathering in his eyes, and I threw it away. Silence stretched between us. Finally, he whispered, "Is there any way back?" I stirred sugar into my coffee, thinking. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe, but not with words, Daniel, with actions. Show me you've changed, not for me, for yourself." He nodded quickly, like a man clinging to a lifeline. I left without promises. That was something he'd have to earn. Back home, I tended the garden Michael used to fuss over. I planted daisies in neat rows, smiling as the soil crumbled between my fingers. He always said daisies were honest flowers. Simple, resilient, unpretentious. I wanted them everywhere, a reminder of the life we built together, stripped of vanity, full of quiet strength. That summer, the Ramirez family moved into Daniel and Sophie's old house. I drove by one evening and saw children playing tag in the yard, their laughter spilling into the street. Mr. Ramirez was in the garden, coaxing tomatoes out of the same soil Michael once worked. He looked up and waved. For the first time, I didn't feel bitterness looking at that house. I felt gratitude. It was finally home to a family that cherished it. At the Foundation's first anniversary banquet, we honored Michael's memory with stories and laughter. A scholarship recipient, Sarah Patterson, stood at the podium, nervous but determined. "Because of the Hart Foundation," she said, "I'm studying to be a nurse. Someday, I'll help people the way doctors helped my mom when she was sick. I'll never forget what this means." I sat in the front row, tears brimming, whispering to the empty chair beside me. You'd be proud, Michael. We did this. Later, at home, I poured myself a cup of tea and settled into his old chair. The house no longer felt hollow. It felt full, of purpose, of new beginnings. Daniel's journey wasn't mine to carry anymore. Maybe he would change, maybe he wouldn't. But I had finally accepted that his choices were his own. When I knelt at Michael's grave on his birthday, daisies in hand, I told him everything about the scholarships, the research funding, the way the community center buzzed with life. I told him about Daniel too, how he was working, struggling, maybe learning at last. I don't feel angry anymore, I whispered, pressing the flowers into the grass. I feel peace, and I hope wherever you are, you know I finally found my strength. As the sun dipped low, casting the cemetery in warm light, a sense of calm washed over me. For the first time since that awful phone call months ago, I didn't ache with loss. I felt steady, anchored by the knowledge that love, real love, had guided every hard decision. Justice had been served, but more importantly, dignity had been restored. Michael's memory lived on not in bitterness, but in kindness, in scholarships, in daisies blooming in the front yard. That night, I slept deeply, dreaming of Michael's smile, hearing his voice whisper in the wind. You did the right thing, Linda. I'm proud of you. And for once, I believed it.